All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 2015. I'm smack dab in the middle of Chapter 16 of 25, and we're going over how to use the list view and data pager controls. And we're up to the product list application, which starts on page 584 of the text. This application uses the list view control to display a list of products. All right. It is similar to the application that we looked at for Chapter 14, which used a grid view, and that was back on pages 500 and 501. But the idea is this one is supposed to start to show you the versatility of using the list view control. What you can see here is the first column contains the product name for each row in the products table of the Halloween database, and the second column contains the headings, all right, for the other product columns, and the third column has the data. You couldn't do this if you were using a grid view control because, again, that capability isn't provided with a grid view control. Also, we've got the data pager control that's used here. This control specifies that only 4 products should be displayed on each page. It's implemented using the next and previous pager with custom values. All right, so before we look at the ASPX for it, let's go and run this. Not sure what that is. Not sure what that is. So again, I'm on page 586 in your text. So we're getting the same information that we got with the grid view, but it's really in a lot nicer looking format. All right, very professional looking. And it's bootstrapped. All right, so it's still responsive, and we can move and have our next 4 show. We can go to the end. We can jump to the beginning, etc. Okay? Now, as far as the default ASPX, which is shown on pages 587, 588, and 589, the author selected a flow layout from the Configure List View dialog box. Unlike the code that's generated using a grid layout, the code for a flow layout doesn't use tables. That makes it even easier to apply CSS styling. The first page shows the layout template for the list view control. Again, we've got 2 div elements. The first one is used as the container for the item placeholder, and the second is for the second div is to hold the data pager control that's used by the list view control. The only other change made to the template is that a paragraph was added before the 2 div elements. So we've got a paragraph in here, a P tag. All right. That paragraph contains the literal text that's displayed at the top of the list view control. The second page shows the item template. There were a lot of changes made to the ASPX code that was generated for this template to format the data so that it was in the 3-column format. In particular, div elements were added so the data could be formatted and aligned using bootstrap row and column classes. The third page, the last page, showed the alternating item template for the list view control. It's identical to the item template except that the outermost div is assigned to a custom class named alt row, so we can get the alternate row styling. Okay? All right. To update list view data, you use the edit item and insert item templates. The buttons for working with data in a list view control include Edit, which switches the list view control to edit mode and displays the data using the edit item template. Then you've got Update. In edit mode, it saves the contents that you made to the data source. Cancel, which cancels the current operation. In other words, it brings back the original data. And if the row being inserted was a brand new row, the an empty insert template is then displayed. Delete, which deletes the item from the data source. Insert, which inserts the contents of the data-bound controls into the data source. And Select, which displays the content of the data-bound controls using the selected item. Although you must set the command name property to one of these things here, you can set the text property to anything you want. You can also create buttons that perform custom functions if you want to or need to do something like that. The figure that's shown here, this is figure 1612 on page 593, it presents the templates for the list view control we looked at back in figure 16.1. This control is used to maintain the data in the categories table of the Halloween database. All right, and finally, and I guess they don't show it in here, but the list view control raises many of the same events that the details view control and form view control raise. For example, there's an item updating event that's raised before the item is updated, and the item updated event that's done after. So again, you typically would do the before, so the ones that end in ing, so like updating, you typically do those when you're doing data validation, and the ones that end with ed, such as updated, you do those for error handling code for databases and if database exceptions are thrown. And this works the same as in the maintenance applications we looked at in the last two chapters. All right. There are a couple more apps that are in here. I'm not going to go through those. All right. So again, the idea in here was we went through a very short description of the list view control, and we talked about how the data pager control works along with it. All right, that is it for chapter 16. I have two more chapters left in the database section here in part 3 of the book, and I want to mention something before I go on. That is chapters 17 and 18. Now, what I'm about to tell you is in my humble opinion. So you may or may not agree with this. All right? Chapter 17, which starts in the book on page 597 and will be the next set of videos, is on how to use object data sources with ADO.NET. ADO, an acronym for ActiveX Data Objects. Well, object data sources are another way they can replace SQL data sources. All right, and we'll look at that in a lot of depth and breadth of coverage. In fact, if we look in here for chapter 17, what you'll notice is we have what? At least two programs. Chapter 18, it looks like we have 3 programs. But in my humble opinion, chapter 17 on how to use object data sources with ADO.NET and chapter 18 on how to use model binding in the entity framework are definitely the 2 hardest chapters in this book, with chapter 18 being the hardest chapter, okay? Because it kind of expands upon how databases are used. And it goes through a lot of things like the entity data model and link, which are fairly complex subjects. We will go over them, but I just want to be honest with you and let you know that my knowledge of both ADO.NET and the entity framework is ever expanding. So in other words, it currently is limited. All right, but I will be back to start talking about Chapter 17 in just a couple minutes.